How lucky are we? We create ourselves.
We're living in a golden age of transgender representation. Recent shows like Orange is the New Black, Pose, and Euphoria, and films like Tangerine and A Fantastic Woman have given us nuanced, diverse transgender characters in stories that treat them with sensitivity and purpose.
I'm crying because no one's ever defended me before.
But this change has occurred slowly. The history of trans and gender non-conforming people on screen has largely been dominated by jokes and harmful stereotypes.
If you want a boy, I can be a boy. And if you want a girl, I can be a girl. Hell, I can be whatever you want me to be.
And this has played a huge role in shaping cultural and political attitudes, as well as creating some of the most common misconceptions about trans lives and identities. From making gender nonconformity into a punchline,
Oh, this is something we'll both enjoy,
to depicting trans people as violent killers.
It rubs the lotion on its skin. It does this whenever it's told.
Hollywood has a lot to make up for. Here's our take on how this trans representation has evolved over the years, from punchlines to real people, and where there's still room to grow.
And we march with pride.
You're watching The Take. Let us know your take.
This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. It's like your own personal film festival, streaming anytime, anywhere.
You know what's very, very funny? A man dressed in women's clothing.
Yes, quite. Ripping good love.
Yes.
One of the oldest and most frequent depictions of gender nonconformity has been the trope known as man in a dress. For years, the mere sight of a man in women's clothing seemed to be enough to get a rise out of the audience.
Hey girls, I miss anything?
Male actors have been cross-dressing on screen for the sake of comedy since the silent film era, as comedians from Charlie Chaplin to Flip Wilson to Milton Berle turned breaking gender norms into a punchline.
You never looked lovelier.
Drag in comedy has sometimes been a way to challenge those norms. In 1959's Some Like It Hot, Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis play jazz musicians who are on the run from mobsters, disguising themselves as women.
How do they walk in these things, huh? How do they keep their balance?
Often regarded as one of the greatest comedies of all time, the film uses cross-dressing to critique gender dynamics as the two men confront the everyday challenges of being women.
Dirty old man.
What happened?
I just got pinched in the elevator.
Now you know how the other half lives.
The same can be said for 1982's Tootsie, which finds Dustin Hoffman playing a struggling actor who pretends to be a woman to land work.
Was that for real in there, or were you auditioning for the part?
Which chance will get me a reading, Miss Marshall?
In his guise as Dorothy, Hoffman's character for the first time really sees the rampant sexism that his female coworkers and friends have long been experiencing.
I don't like the way he condescends to me either. Calls me sweetheart, calls me honey, doesn't even know my name.
And he boldly stands up to his male coworkers.
You want some gross caricature of a woman to prove some idiotic point, like power makes women masculine or masculine women are ugly?
But while the character's growth speaks to the value of men learning from and embracing their more feminine sides,
I was a better man with you as a woman than I ever was with a woman as a man.
it also presents femininity as inherently weak by implying it needs a man to defend it.
You're a breakthrough lady for us.
And much of the film's humor comes from that ironic juxtaposition.
Taxi! Taxi! Taxi!
At the core of the man in a dress is deception.
My first day as a woman, I'm getting hot flashes.
For these men, dressing in drag is a lie, undertaken as a means to an end, and hijinks ensue whenever someone comes close to discovering who they really are. This trope isn't entirely limited to men, but women cross-dressing for comedy is generally less common.
Okay, why do you have tampons in your boot?
I get really bad nosebleeds.
As such, it's a ruse steeped in misogyny. The men hide themselves by adopting stereotypical depictions of femininity, like vanity, flightiness, lack of intelligence, and overall weakness to make others find them unthreatening, allowing them to get what they want. This trope has remained especially pervasive in comedies starring black men, who have long been put in dresses for an easy laugh. Putting men in a dress is seen as a means of emasculation.
You don't think you actually still have a anymore, do you?
Come on, man.
The minute you put that dress on, goes away.
And it's a gag that many actors and critics have increasingly begun to challenge as not only sexist but racist, symbolically disempowering black men.
I don't even wear no dress to be funny. What am I, Milton Berle?
As Professor Todd Boyd told NPR,
I don't want to see any more black men in dresses. That is dead. There are already too many forces at work in society attempting to emasculate black men as it is.
In her 2007 book, Whipping Girl, author Julia Serrano coined the term transmisogyny, an intersectional form of sexism she describes as rooted in heterosexual men's fear of being seen as feminine. The mockery of trans women allows those male audiences to process that fear and to feel affirmed in their superiority. Transmisogynist depictions assuage any perceived threats to their heterosexuality by suggesting that trans people aren't real.
Aren't you a little old to be wearing a dress like that?
Don't you have a little too much penis to be wearing a dress like that?
Cross-dressing, drag, and trans identity have long intersected throughout the history of the LGBT community, and for many, drag can be an empowering gateway to a better understanding of your gender identity.
Remember, every one of these contestants before they came here is a winner.
Groundbreaking documentaries like 1968's The Queen about the Miss All-America Camp beauty pageant and 1991's Paris is Burning about the queer ballroom subculture in New York debunked the idea that trans women were just men in costume.
I don't feel that there's anything mannish about me, except maybe what I might have between me down there.
Meanwhile, films like The Birdcage and The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert may have gotten comedic mileage out of casting cisgender and even straight actors as flamboyant drag performers.
That sarcastic, contemptuous tone that means you know everything because you're a man and I know nothing because I'm a woman.
You're not a woman.
Oh, you bastard.
But they also earned plaudits for doing so thoughtfully, portraying their characters as real, feeling people who were quirky and funny for who they are, not what they wear.
Don't let it drag you down. Let it toughen you up. I can only fight because I've learned to.
Recently, we've seen a near-total rejection of the man in a dress trope. In 2012, ABC quickly canceled the sitcom called Work It, about two men who disguised themselves as women in order to land jobs in a recession after the show faced swift, near-universal backlash before it even premiered. A marked shift in public tolerance for even the idea of those kinds of depictions. Increasingly, the man in a dress doesn't seem like a laughing matter. In 2016, Louis Anderson won an Emmy for playing a woman on Baskets, a gender-bending performance he approached sincerely, never turning it into a joke.
Well, I'm your mother. Do you know what that means? Does it mean anything to you?
Yes, Mom.
Meanwhile, the success of shows like RuPaul's Drag Race and We're Here have helped to bring drag fully back into the domain of queer culture, reclaiming it as a powerful artistic expression rather than a tool of mockery and oppression. It's no longer seen as a means of hilarious deception, but of living your truth.
I love that gown.
You should, Queen. It's one of your old ones.
A darker trans depiction has commonly seen these characters used not to provoke laughter, but terror. Gender nonconformance has long been portrayed as immoral, criminal, and a sign of mental illness.
Billy hates his own identity, you see, and he thinks that makes him a transsexual. But his pathology is 1,000 times more savage.
This reached its nadir with the media coverage around 1950s serial killer Ed Gein, when Life magazine falsely claimed that Gein had killed women and skinned them because he wanted to be one. Gein's story ended up directly inspiring classic horror movie villains like Silence of the Lambs' Buffalo Bill and Leatherface of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, creating the popular myth of the disturbed transsexual.
He's making himself a woman's suit, Mr. Crawford, out of real women.
My brother here is tired of what's-her-name's face, and he wants a new one. It just happens to be he wants this face, right here.
Gein was also the model for one of horror's most depraved villains. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho introduced Norman Bates as a confused, cross-dressing murderer.
Why was he dressed like that? He's a transvestite.
Helping to cement in the public consciousness that gender nonconformance was a sign of instability, deviance, and danger. The film does attempt to differentiate Norman's condition.
A man who dresses in women's clothing in order to achieve a sexual satisfaction is a transvestite. He was simply doing everything possible to keep alive the illusion of his mother being alive.
Yet it also paints gender nonconformance and mental illness as inextricably connected, much as Hitchcock did 30 years earlier in 1930's Murder, whose own cross-dressing villain Handel Fane is portrayed as overtly effeminate.
This is Handel Fane, 100% he-woman.
It's also later revealed that he's of mixed race, making him a cipher for multiple social anxieties.
A half-caste, black blood.
Psycho inspired a long legacy of imitators, beginning with William Castle's Homicidal in 1961.
Know me?
And carrying through Brian De Palma's 1980 Hitchcock homage, Dressed to Kill.
What's wrong with that guy anyway?
He was a transsexual, about to make the final step, but his male side couldn't let him do it.
The trope of the cross-dressing killer fostered long-standing prejudices that something was wrong with queer people, that they were mentally ill, undeserving of empathy, and potentially deadly. As writer K.E. Sullivan pointed out in an essay for Jump Cut, both the man in a dress and the cross-dressing killer rely on the revelation of a character's supposedly true nature. Only these gender nonconforming villains don't hide or empower a clever heterosexual man, but reveal a monstrous gender and sexual deviant. 1994's Ace Ventura combines comic ridicule and villainization in its reveal of Police Lieutenant Einhorn's former identity as NFL player Ray Finkel.
Oh my God! Einhorn is a man!
And even when they're not portrayed as murderers or psychopaths, a character's transgender identity can still be used to provoke shock. When 1992's The Crying Game featured the revelation that Jay Davidson's Dill is actually a transgender woman, critics likened it to the twist in Psycho, reinforcing the idea that it was inherently unsettling. In part, due to these kinds of representations, to this day, transgender people live under a cloud of mistrust, as seen in the political attempts to bar them from jobs, medical care, homeless shelters, and even public restrooms.
Nobody in their right mind wants to see a grown adult man, a stranger, alone in a bathroom with little girls.
And sadly, this trope has not been totally eradicated on screen either, as seen in the psychopathic trans character Cece on Pretty Little Liars.
Wait, so Cece is Charles? She is a she, right?
In reality, of course, trans people are much more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators, and more recent portrayals have reflected that they have more to fear from society than the other way around.
The NYPD doesn't care about a murdered transsexual. We've never been treated with respect or dignity.
But most importantly, Hollywood seems to be waking up to the idea that trans people are just that, people. One of the biggest problems with on-screen trans representation is that it has long excluded actual trans people. In classic Hollywood, where all queerness had to be coded in subtext and innuendo to get around the rigid Hays Code,
I know what it is that gives me a queer feeling when I look at you.
it was rare to even get a semi-respectful portrayal of gender nonconformance with cis actors, like Katharine Hepburn's cross-dressing character in Sylvia Scarlett. One of the first films to earnestly tackle transgender issues was inspired by early transgender icon Christine Jorgensen, an ex-GI who received gender affirmation surgery in 1951 and became one of the most talked about women in the nation. But despite being a popular performer herself, she didn't get to star in her own story. Instead, it was adapted as 1953's Glenn or Glenda, which starred its director Ed Wood, a cisgender man who largely ignored Jorgensen's story and made it about his own transvestism.
The world is shocked by a person who changed his sex. Thus, the strange case of Glenn, who was Glenda, one and the same person.
The very slow movement toward more positive trans representation spawned critically lauded performances.
Relax, I don't bite.
These were sympathetic portrayals, and along with films like Transamerica and The Danish Girl, they brought more grounded stories with a compassionate perspective of trans resilience to a mainstream audience.
I'll never be as pretty as you.
You are so beautiful.
But they also drew increasing criticism for their casting of cisgender actors who were accused of appropriating trans lives and stories while denying opportunities for actual trans people to tell these stories. There were some notable exceptions through the years. Trans actress Holly Woodlawn became the first to inspire an organized Oscar campaign for her performance in 1970's Trash. Trans actress and club performer the Lady Chablis gained a wide following through appearing as herself in Clint Eastwood's 1997 film adaptation of Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. And trans director Silas Howard, who would later go on to direct for Transparent and Pose, made his debut with 2001's By Hook or By Crook, a buddy film about the relationship between two trans men. Then, in 2013, came what Time magazine would later call the transgender tipping point, heralded by the arrival of trans actress Laverne Cox on Netflix's Orange is the New Black.
Such pretty hair. When those roots start to show, be sure to come and see me, okay? I'll take good care of you.
Cox's character Sophia wasn't a joke, a psychopath, or a cliche. She was a real trans person facing genuine struggles.
Listen, Doc, I need my dosage. I've given 5 years, $80,000 and my freedom for this. I'm finally who I'm supposed to be.
She was also given a life, including a backstory that revealed her journey toward her identity and the difficulty she faced in opening up to her wife.
You don't have to stay.
Where would I go? This is my family.
Although Sophia's trans identity overlaps with her criminality, given that she committed fraud to finance her transition, she's also given empathetically human motivation for breaking the law, and throughout, she wants nothing more than to get her family back.
I'm gonna get my together. I promise. I'm gonna make it up to you.
Cox's lauded performance presaged even more powerful and nuanced representation in shows like Sense8, The OA, and Euphoria, and critically acclaimed films like Tangerine and the Oscar-winning A Fantastic Woman, all of which also cast trans actors in trans roles. Amazon's Transparent, though starring a cis man, made a trans woman's late-in-life transition the focus of an honest story about the internal and external battles that trans people face. This growing movement reached its most revolutionary moment with Pose, a series that assembled TV's largest ever cast of trans actors, then centered its story on Blanca, a trans woman who transcends being a joke, social pariah, or sexual object to be a leading light in her community. When we first meet Blanca, she's just learned she's HIV positive.
This doesn't have to be a death sentence, isn't it though?
We soon learn she's also been rejected by her family.
When you get rejected by your mother, your father, you're always out there looking for someone to replace that love you're missing.
But rather than telling a story focused on struggle or defeat, Pose finds Blanca using the time she has left to lift others up, dedicating herself to being a mother to her chosen family.
My house has rules and I expect you both to follow them.
I'm sorry. Rules.
Yes.
And although Blanca faces adversity, Pose is more interested in her motivations and how she sees the world than in how the world sees her. And this feels like a new beginning.
You have to shine so bright out there that they can't deny you.
We're only a few years past that transgender tipping point, but it's already done much to counteract decades of damage. Faced with growing public outcry, actresses like Scarlett Johansson and Halle Berry have backed out of trans roles, while other cisgender stars who have taken them in the past have said they wouldn't do so again.
I would not be unhappy were I the last cisgender male to play a female transgender on television.
Promisingly, GLAAD found that trans representation on TV increased to 38 characters in 2019, up from just 26 in 2018. And in 2020, Netflix released the documentary Disclosure: Trans Lives on Screen, an eye-opening look at the history of trans representation that has exposed a broader audience to the many ways this community has been horribly mistreated in film and television, and the way that trans people have always been an indelible part of our culture.
Trans and cinema have grown up together. It's like we have always been present on screen.
Yet even as Hollywood increasingly acknowledges trans people and stories, the fight for visibility continues. While there are more trans women on screen than ever, trans men, trans people of color, and non-binary people still remain underrepresented. Promisingly, when these characters do show up, their stories aren't always just about their gender identities. Increasingly, they're just one facet of their lives, unique yet unremarkable.
Theo might look like a girl, but he's not. He's a boy.
And that's how he's always been. He's just ready now.
At long last, we're seeing the trans community for who they really are.
I did my time. I'm looking forward now.
If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get notified about all our new videos. This video is brought to you by Mubi, a streaming service we love. Mubi is a treasure trove of films. Every day, Mubi premieres a new film. Whether it's a movie you've been dying to see or one you've never heard of before, there is always something new to discover. So in this world where it's very easy to spend hours debating what you should watch, Mubi is like having a really cool friend with amazing taste in movies, making it so much easier for you. They feature hard-to-come-by masterpieces, indie festival darlings, influential art house and foreign films, lesser-known films by your favorite famous directors, and more. Plus, you can even download the films to watch offline, and there are no ads, ever. Right now, as part of Mubi's new Brazilian cinema series, you can check out Indianara, filmed guerrilla style in the run-up to the election of President Jair Bolsonaro. The 2019 documentary follows LGBTQ activist Indianara and her fight for transgender survival in Brazil. We can't recommend Mubi highly enough. You can try it out now for free for a whole month. Just click the link in the description below.